Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We need to talk about a pretty sudden and honestly kind of shocking consumer update. The Meta Quest 3 literally just got $100 more expensive overnight. If you've been, holding out for a holiday sale or saving up your cash to jump into mixed reality, well, the goalpost just moved. So today, we're going to unpack exactly what happened. And more importantly, we're going to look at the massive global forces that actually caused it.
Right out of the gate, we have to frame why this $100 matters so much. Look, the Quest is hands down the most accessible standalone VR headset on the market. Historically, Meta has heavily subsidized the cost of these headsets just to get them into as many hands as humanly possible. Why? Because price is the absolute #1 barrier to mass VR adoption. So a sudden $100 jump, that's not just a minor annoyance, it's a massive brick wall for new users who are just trying to enter the ecosystem.
But here's where the story gets really fascinating. It's super easy to look at a price hike like this and immediately point the finger at corporate greed or just assume it's a simple margin grab. But the core premise of our analysis today is actually a bit different. We're investigating this sudden sticker shock to reveal the massive macroeconomic shift that's driving it. Believe it or not, the real culprit behind your more expensive headset is actually living inside a data center thousands of miles away.
So, here's our quick roadmap for today. First, the price hike. Second, AI's global RAM squeeze. Third, Reality Labs losing billions. And finally, the VR buyer's dilemma.
All right, let's kick things off with part one, the price hike.
Let's look at how the numbers actually changed for the consumer. Effective April 19, 2026, Meta rolled out a hard price increase across its entire active Quest lineup. The entry-level Quest 3S, the 128GB model, jumped from $299 up to $349. The 256GB version of the 3S, that moved from $399 up to $449. So that's a $50 jump just to get your foot in the door. But the flagship Quest 3, the big 512GB model, jumped a full $100, going from $499 back up to $599. Even refurbished units saw a pretty noticeable bump.
So how exactly is Meta explaining this to the public? Well, they put out this official statement. They said, the global surge in the price of critical components, specifically memory chips, is impacting almost every category of consumer electronics, including VR. Notice what they're doing there. They are directly pivoting the blame away from their own profit margins and pointing straight at the global supply chain. They're basically claiming that the raw cost of building high-performance VR hardware has simply risen way too fast for them to ignore.
Which brings us nicely to part two, AI's global RAM squeeze.
So you might be wondering, is there really a memory chip crisis? The short answer is yes, absolutely, and it is completely unprecedented. Just take a look at this. DDR5 memory prices surged over 250% between early 2025 and 2026. In some spot markets, contract prices for these memory chips jumped nearly 300% in just a matter of months. Why? Because the AI boom is essentially devouring the entire global chip supply. AI data centers require these absolutely massive memory footprints just to train large language models. And the real irony here, and it's a huge one, is that Meta itself plans to spend $135 billion on AI infrastructure in 2026. So Meta's own insatiable appetite for AI memory is actively contributing to the exact same component shortage that's jacking up the price of their VR headsets. Wild, right?
To put this into a bit more perspective, Meta is far from the only victim of this, Ramageddon. They are simply absorbing real cost increases, exactly like the rest of the tech industry. Think about it. Sony recently had to increase the price of the PS5 console globally, which pushed the full buy-in for a PlayStation VR 2 system to over $1,000. PC gamers are paying double, sometimes triple, for RAM upgrades compared to last year. Even Valve had to step up and announce they were rethinking the shipping schedule and pricing for their upcoming Steam Frame VR headset, all because of this exact same memory crisis.
Let's move on to part three, Reality Labs losing billions.
To really build a complete picture of Meta's hardware business, we have to look at the financial health of the division that actually makes these headsets. And the crucial point here is this absolutely staggering number. Reality Labs lost $19.19 billion in 2025 alone. Since 2020, they've racked up over $83 billion in operating losses. Now, historically, Meta was totally willing to bleed cash. They'd subsidize the hardware just to get headsets onto people's faces, accepting these razor-thin profit margins of around 10 to 20%. But with RAM costs skyrocketing the way they are, subsidizing that hardware means bleeding cash even faster.
They simply cannot afford to heavily subsidize these headsets forever in an economy where component costs are inflating this aggressively.
And you really have to pair those massive financial losses with the current shipment data. Look at this. Meta shipped roughly 1.7 million Quest units in the first 3 quarters of 2025. While they absolutely still dominate the standalone VR market, that is a 42% year-over-year decline in shipments. It shows that consumer adoption is really sluggish right now. This just highlights the massive struggle for mainstream adoption. They're bleeding billions, component costs are through the roof, and the headsets just aren't flying off the shelves as fast as they need them to.
Which, naturally, leads to a pretty grim industry outlook. Analysts are actively warning that raising prices right now is creating another massive barrier to entry at literally the worst possible time. The broader consumer electronics market is already dealing with heavy inflation, and buyers are incredibly price-sensitive right now. Pushing that entry price up from $299 to $349 and bumping the flagship to almost $600, well, it seriously risks stalling VR adoption even further, right when the industry desperately needs some forward momentum.
Finally, let's wrap up with part 4, the VR buyer's dilemma. Let's bring all this global macroeconomic turbulence back down to earth, to you, the individual consumer. We're left with a stark reality. First off, if you already own a Quest 3, well, congratulations, your headset's resale value just went up. You got in at exactly the right time. But for new buyers, there is undeniably a higher barrier to entry now. Although this does open up some pretty interesting speculation. Industry insiders are suggesting this whole RAM crisis might finally ease up by late 2027 or maybe 2028. So could a highly anticipated Quest 4 eventually launch at a lower, heavily subsidized price point once those memory costs finally stabilize? I guess we're just going to have to wait and see on that one.
Which brings us to the ultimate question for our explainer today. We know the price of components is soaring, we know the AI boom is largely to blame, and we know Meta just can't afford to subsidize hardware forever. But as a consumer, does this $100 price hike actually change your recommendation to friends who are thinking about buying a Quest? Or, honestly, is the standalone VR experience still completely worth the value, even at $599? Let me know what you guys think, and I will see you in the next explainer.